Hey, I'm Shay Warner, and you are listening to Casual Cattle Conversations. If you are ready to explore different management practices and focus on improving your operation and the beef industry, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited you are listening. Alrighty, folks, it's Shay here, and welcome back to another episode of Casual Cattle Conversations. Today, we are visiting with Doug Ferguson, and he is going to be talking about his strategies with sell-by marketing and how he applies those to the cattle industry and also teaches others to do the same. Specifically with that, we are going to be focusing on bred heifers. Now, with that, before we dive into the conversation itself today, one thing that Doug brings up is to know your break even. And I feel like this is something that we hear and we think is simple, but yet how many of us are ballparking it or saying about or really don't even know, or maybe we kind of feel like we don't want to know. But the reality is, if we want to be profitable and run businesses, we need to understand that break even. So think a little bit about that topic and if you know it or what you can do to figure it out sooner rather than later as you listen to this conversation with Doug today. With that, let's jump in. Alrighty, folks, I want to take a quick second to talk about Alltech. Alltech is a global feed ingredient company delivering smarter, more sustainable solutions for agriculture. Alltech's diverse portfolio of products and services improves the health and performance of livestock, and their technical support teams work with you to provide the best nutritional fit for your operation. Contact your local feed supplier or your local Alltech rep to discuss options in your area. You can learn more about Alltech by checking out the link in the show notes. Well, Doug, I appreciate you joining me today to have some conversations about cattle marketing and specifically kind of in the heifer space. So before we dive into that conversation, I know I first heard your name just by reading some of your articles on the internet. So I've been following you for a while and I'm excited to have you on here. But can you share a little bit about your background in the beef industry and why you're passionate about cattle marketing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Shay. My background, pretty much like any other farm kid, grew up pretty conventional farm background, family farm. We had commercial cows and calves. Back when I was a kid, grandfather was still alive, and they used to feed everything out. So they would sell those fats at the Omaha stockyards. I'm old enough that I barely remember the Omaha stockyards and doing that. After the stockyards closed, they went to just weaning the calves, background them, sell them when they weighed 800 pounds, which I come to find out later meant we're going to get rid of the chores now that it's time to do spring field work. Um, really probably fell in love with cattle when I was in 4-H, like a lot of us. And I would say probably about the time I was maybe a sophomore in high school, I was 15 years old. I made that irrevocable, committed decision that I am going to raise cattle for a living. Now, why did I become so passionate about marketing was because I was bombarded with the same message that we all are. Cattle is something you do on evenings and weekends. You got to go to school, get a degree, get a job with benefits, yak, yak, yak. Where I'm kind of that teenager, maybe with the bad attitude, is kind of how I got tagged, where I was like, BS, you got this $80 billion a year industry and we're all doing it for giggles. Like, there's got to be a way. And years later, I stumbled into Ann Barnhart's sell by marketing school. That's where I was first exposed to it. And I'm like, this is it. This is the answer. This is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. If you can make money raising cattle, you can do it for a full-time occupation. And that's really what triggered that drive and that passion was that's all I want to do in life is three things: ride bulls, have a family, and raise cattle. That's it.
So with that, you have your own cattle today, right?
Yep.
But you also teach marketing yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah. I years ago, after Ann quit teaching marketing schools, a few people approached me kind of like, hey, you ought to do this. I resisted. Years later, I kind of got pushed into it. And, I did the first school, what was that? The end of the summer of 2020. I mean, just kind of after they were starting to reopen things after the COVID shutdown. And, we've been doing a handful of schools every year since. And, we'll do maybe 5 schools a year. The most we did was 7. And with trying to be a dad and going to my daughter's activities and raising cattle, we found out 7 is too many. So, yeah,
And all of those are in-person schools?
they're all in-person schools. I don't do anything virtual. I feel like, well, there's 2 reasons. Number one, I'm pretty anti-technology. And so I don't want to mess with streaming and stuff like that. I'd have to bring in a computer nerd to help me with that. And the other thing is, if you're there in person, you're present. If you're at home and we're streaming this virtual, you've got so many distractions and things around you, and then your mind will start to wander and drift. Where if I have you in the classroom, if I catch you drifting, I will wake you up. People that have been to the schools can verify that. So I'll pull you back.
Well, I always appreciate a good in-person event. I do a lot of virtual ones, but you can't beat an in-person event. So with those schools and you helping other people, before we kind of dive in deeper into our own topic, I want to touch on kind of the broader subject of cattle marketing and mindset. So when you are teaching other producers about cattle marketing strategies, what's the biggest mindset shift they have to make or that you see them making?
We're getting close to having 700 people have gone through the schools, and I'll tell you, every group is different. To really pinpoint like one big thing, I don't know that I can really pull that one thing out. So what I've done is I start all my schools with what has kind of been tagged the psychology lesson, where I talked about what I call the X paradigm. That's our existing paradigm, and it's what we got handed to us when we were young. From 4-H leaders, VOAG instructors, what you learn in college, all that gets built into that X paradigm. And if you've never seen sell by marketing before, that is what I call the Y idea. And X and Y are like oil and water, they don't mix. And so I start with that. I don't get into anything as far as trading or any of the math until day 2. I try to build everything up and flow into that direction. So when we do get to the second day, it's fun. When I get into the trading and the math, it looks like a current electricity spreads through the room. You can see people start to get it, but there's always a few that, at the end of the school, they're like, man, I don't know. I just, I'm struggling with how could the market go down and I could still positive cash flow. That X paradigm hangs on so strong. And so really what I've kind of come to realize by doing these schools is learning new things is easy. It's letting go of the old ideas that are hard. And that's probably the biggest challenge, you know. Um, just like you mentioned, you got a family farm background, I got a family farm background, and tradition. I mean, peer pressure from dead people, it creeps in, and you talk to some of these people. Well, why do you do that? Well, that's the way we've always done it. Well, why? I don't know. Dad did it that way. Well, why did your dad do it that way? Well, his dad did it that way. Well, that one time grandpa did it, it worked really good. And it may not have ever worked since, but we continue to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes we forget how much times have changed, the economy has changed, the tools we have available have changed, and it's easy to get stuck in that because it's comfortable, even though maybe we're
Exactly.
not tracking it enough like we should.
Yep. Comfortable is exactly it. That comfort zone is, we always retreat back to that.
So, Doug, I really wanted to have a conversation about marketing bred heifers today and maybe get some tips and advice and kind of see what trends you're seeing in that space. Um, and this is something that it's a topic that's been requested by my listeners before. And so, I guess to start off on this topic itself, what trends have you been seeing with producers either wanting to market bred heifers or how they're marketing or anything like that?
there's a lot of different directions I could go with that. And to try to keep the answer short and on point, there is a definite demand for females. I mean, not just heifers, but of any age. The heifer kind of gets discounted a little bit because the baby boomers still out, I mean, they still outspend us all. They make the market. So probably the one big thing on bred heifers, I feel like you really can't go too wrong buying bred heifers because the 3 and 4 year old cows are outselling bred heifers. So they are still appreciating in value. So if you can buy this bred heifer, get her to get that calf on the ground, claim it, breed back, she's going to appreciate in value. Um, I just mentioned paradigms here a little bit ago. And we've got this paradigm that these heifers have to check off all these boxes, whether it's pelvic measurement, time AI, got a calf at a certain time of year. So she has this postpartum interval to breed back and stay within the herd. Um, you know, Bred low birth weight bulls. I mean, there's all these boxes, even body weight. They got to be so big. The thing is, nobody's paying you because that heifer checked off all those boxes. But it is still very difficult to sell them without those females checking off those boxes. But then if we compare to that 3, 4 year old, there's only two boxes. Can she calve and can she breed back? And then she's worth more money.
So what about open heifers?
The market's very forgiving with those right now. With the price of cattle going up as much as it has, especially here in the recent, I mean, at the time of recording this, bird flu is kind of taken off. So we're seeing a market dip. But if you look at the charts, I mean, the last several months up till now, these markets have gone straight up. So even if you end up with open heifers, you're still coming out pretty good.
Okay.
That probably will change eventually. I think it's especially as we get this herd rebuilding kind of caught back up, then I think you'll probably see that being discounted a little bit more. But the feeder market's so good. If she comes up open, you just roll her that way and you're still all right.
So you made the comment earlier that you can't go wrong with buying the bred heifer because she can still appreciate in value. Is that comment, were you saying that for someone who is maybe going to buy her, calve her out, breed her back, and resell as a 3 or 4 year old, or as for like a cow calf guy who is maybe looking to replenish their own herd?
Um, I'm going to put it this way. Everything that I think of in my mind, I'm always looking at selling and replacing, selling and replacing. Cattle were not meant for owning. They were meant for trading. And I get it for a lot of traditional cow calf people, that statement was just very abrasive. But it doesn't always mean you have to sell her. What you do have to do is reassess her value. So we've been given this old paradigm. You get this young heifer and she's got 10 years to pay for herself or whatever formula you use, That's a really lousy business model. But if you constantly reassess her value every year, and so you compare, the intrinsic value to the actual value, you're forcing her to earn her keep in the herd. Now, the thing about this is during that lifetime, that female's gonna be overvalued. I mean, if you're looking at a 10-year window, she's gonna be overvalued sometime or maybe even twice during that 10-year window. The other reason that I highly suggest trading is when we look at the fallout rate of females, a lot of people say they lose 16 to 19% of them a year. So if you started with 100 head of bred heifers, by the time they all reach their ninth calf, and they're like 10 years old, you're only going to have maybe 19, 20 head of those left.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're really a big believer in the longevity thing, between the age of 10 and 12, their pregnancy rate drops off about another 8 to 10%. So you're going to have a bunch of them fall out right there. Now, if she's, and I've seen this from other producers that have come to the schools, they've showed me their inventory from Florida to South Dakota, Western states, even in Southern states, they've all showed the same thing. If she breeds back at age 12, she stays in the herd until she's old enough to vote. But you're only going to have maybe 14 or 15 head of those out of that original 100. So just because of that fallout rate, that's why I highly suggest that people trade cows. And we can trade cows, but any female, really, bred female or cows, at bigger margins than we can sell the calves that we wean off of. So the bulk of your money could really come just from marketing females.
Can you walk through maybe an example of that like maybe you do or maybe one of your students do, just to paint a little bit more of a picture of how that would work? I know I just asked off the cuff.
That's really good. There's a guy right here in Kansas, to just across the state line to the west of me, so like north central Kansas. Last year in 2023, we were hammered hard with the drought, just like anybody else. And this guy, he's one of those that has spent a lot of money on bulls and put a really big emphasis on the genetics in his herd. And now he's forced with the idea of culling. And one of the things that I talk about in my marketing schools, see, with sell by marketing, it's a head per head trade. So you sell one, you replace it with one. And he walked away with the idea that he shouldn't just liquidate. He should trade the head per head. And so what he did is he pulled deeper in his herd and bought stalker calves. Because, in theory, they're smaller, they eat less. And that allowed him to utilize the forage that he did grow on his pastures last summer. By just the way the market worked, those stalker calves went up a lot in value over the summer. He sold them at the end of the summer, and we have that seasonal, what do you want to call it? That female slump, that dead area in there at the end of the summer where, bred cows don't bring as much. And he bought back some bred cows, and he bought back some spring calving cows. And this guy, with the corn paradigm, absolutely hates fall calving females, but he bought some. He calved those out, resold them as pairs, almost doubled his money on them, and then bought back more spring calving females. So, I mean, he did several sell-by trades in there, even though he had to swap classes, going from breeding stock to stalkers. Then he went back to breeding stock. Those trades, he made really good money, captured a lot of value, and that helped offset the burden of the drought that we went through. So, I mean, with good marketing skill is your number one advantage being in the cattle business, but he was also doing resource management. He was managing the feed that he was growing, that he had available on his ranch, by doing these trades, and did an outstanding job.
Thank you for walking
I
through
hope
that.
that answers. I hope that answers that question for you. Okay, good.
Yeah, that was a great example and very logical, made sense. I appreciate you walking through that. Now, I want to go back to the bred heifer discussion from a few questions back. So when people are selling bred heifers, what are some of the biggest missed opportunities or mistakes they may make that don't allow them to capture their full value or get as much value out of them as they maybe could?
The first thing I'm going to say is you got to know your costs. I mean, absolutely. Every red penny that flows out of the account, you got to be tracking that. There's, the neat thing about $8 corn and $5 diesel a couple years ago, if I asked somebody what their cost was, they knew. Now the cost of those things has gone down and the price of cattle's gone up. And you ask somebody, what's your cost? And the first word out of their mouth is, oh, about. So now we're back to guessing again. So know your cost.
Hey folks, have you ever tried to create your own website but just end up feeling frustrated? Or maybe you even hired a corporate company to handle it, but their lack of ag knowledge resulted in something that didn't fit your brand? I'd invite you to visit with my friend Hannah Nelson. She's the owner of Rural Way Promotions. Hannah grew up on a farm in western Nebraska, so she understands your business and also how to create a website that will connect you with your ideal customers. She takes pride in working with rural businesses to get their products and services online so that they can get back to doing what they love. Contact Hannah today by going to ruralwaypro.com. bred.com to finally get a website that works for you. That link is in the show notes.
The other thing, if you're going to be selling bred heifers, it doesn't matter what you like. It matters what your customer likes. And you have to bring something to market that people want to buy. And so my biggest example of this is, you breed these heifers to bulls that you're familiar with, that you know something about, that you think are great. But your customer may not agree with that. And I watched a sale in north central Missouri last fall, and there were a lot of heifers on that sale that were bred to bulls of a particular breed. And you darn sure noticed they sold off the pace from the other ones that were bred black Angus. I mean, that's always the safe option. So if you're going to go some of those other routes, you have to know the market that you're selling into. Another thing to keep in mind, some of these breeders that sell bulls have that sale barn reputation, and you better be very well aware of what that sale barn reputation is. At our local sale barn here in Beatrice, there will be heifers or cows, just females in general, that come to town bred to those bulls, and you will see them sell way off the pace, because any of us that have been around for a while know that some of them are coming out the side of the cow, and you're probably going to bend a calf jack, in the process, and we just won't buy them. So keep some of those things in mind. That's for darn sure.
So what about how you're marketing? You brought up the sale, taking them to a sale barn. Is it looking for a specific, if they're having a special sale day for bred heifers, or should you look and try and sell independently? Does it matter at all?
The nice thing about selling, private treaty is you don't have the commissions, and you kind of get to pick the shipping date. There's a little bit more flexibility there, but there's also advantages to, selling on those monthly specials. I mean, they are a monthly special, emphasis on the word special, for a reason, because people that are looking for those types of animals, they come to those, and there's a good volume, and there's usually there should be a female in the offering for anybody. I mean, different ages, different types, colors, different stages of gestation. That's why you have pairs and fall calvers and cows that are close up, and things like that. And so it does attract a lot of buyer attention. The thing about when you sell private treaty, you're hoping the other guy's check is good. You sell at sale barn, it's going to be good. The other thing, when you do sell on those monthly specials, they also charge special commissions. It's like the preg. If you have them pregged at the barn before the sale, that preg chuck costs more than it does on the weekly feeder auction, and mouthing them costs more. And, the commissions can be a little higher. And, of course, the overnight feed is going to cost a lot more. So you're going to have a little added expense in there as well. But the other thing is the exposure.
So, you talked about already, if you're breeding these heifers, be mindful of which bulls you're using and the reputation behind those bulls. What other information is important to provide for the customer about these heifers?
Well, like I mentioned the check boxes earlier, they're not going to pay you for that female checking off all those boxes, but they're darn sure going to discount you if she doesn't. So it's, how do we hit all these check boxes and still manage to keep our costs down? The other thing to kind of keep in mind is people don't always know what, like, I'll take myself, for example. I'll just speak from that. It's been I've done sell by trading for so long. It's been a long time since I've run a closed herd. And so now if you start talking to me about so and so's bulls or these genetics, or I have no idea what you're talking about. And I think a lot of people don't, especially at least where I live. I'm southeast Nebraska, we're in farmer country. we know a lot more about corn hybrids than we do about, sires and things of that nature. You know, a lot of it is you just got to have something that your customer wants to buy. And kind of going back, you asked about trends earlier. That blaze face stem Angus was a very hot thing, a couple years ago. It's kind of cooled off now, but even still, that stem Angus with that blaze face is still a hot one. F1 Baldies are always hot. They're always hot. An F1 Baldy female will outsell her still brothers. But if you have a black Angus cow mated to a Hereford bull, oh crap, we just heard the word Hereford. We're going to discount her. Like, do we know where black Baldies come from? I mean, I chuckle about that. Almost every month, you'll see that on a sale. So right there's a good one. If you could buy that discounted one that's bred Hereford, you'll buy it discounted because she's bred Hereford, but then you can sell that calf at a premium because it's an F1. Taking advantage of small little things like that. And then on some of these specials, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but over in Missouri, they have those Show Me Select
Mm-hmm.
female sales. Value added marketing is only value added if you capture the added value. And that Show Me Select sale has done an outstanding job of capturing that added value. So not only do they have a longer list of check boxes that those females have to meet, but then if you sell bred heifers on those sales, the sire has to meet a long list of check boxes, and they do capture a good premium. And I can't remember what all the things are, the requirements that they have to meet, but it is extensively long, and they do capture a heck of a premium. The one thing about that sale for people that haven't seen it is they sell them like 1 to 3 head at a time. So there's not going to be very many of them, but man, are they going to capture a hell of a premium.
Yeah, I had Dr. Jordan Thomas on the
Oh,
podcast
yeah.
over a year ago. And so he's involved with a lot of that. And we didn't talk directly about that, but we did touch on it just because it is pretty cool what they do.
Yeah, it's an amazing program what they do over there. And the other thing when I mentioned genetics and what bulls you breed to, uh, sometimes you get into these what do they call them, like the influence sales. So
Mm-hmm.
people that are looking for those type of genetics that are, will pay attention to those, and you could capture a little premium selling them there as well. But you're getting those females in front of people that are familiar with what you're doing. And that's a big help.
So you've talked about knowing what your customer wants, or in the business world, we might talk about it as a target audience. Same thing.
Mhm.
What tips do you have for people to better understand who their ideal customer is and how to get in front of them?
Communication's a big thing. Um, if I'm familiar, I'm most comfortable in sale barns. That's where I do most of my business. And so I'll kind of answer from that perspective, but talk to the guys that run the sale barns. Be like, hey, what phone calls are you getting? What are people calling and asking you for? You know, how can we best serve that market, type deal. So there was one example. There was a guy here, he used to run the heifer development deal. So he would buy the fancy black heifers, run them out, time AI them, try to select the best bulls that he could. And he was bringing them back, selling as breds. What he found out was he's better off selling them as pairs. And this guy was doing hundreds of them. So all of a sudden, he went from selling hundreds of bred heifers to calving hundreds of bred heifers and then sell them as pairs. He actually got to have his own special sale at the sale barn where they, sold a lot of these pairs. And man, he did fantastic doing that. So right there, he added an extra layer of service by getting that calf on the ground and getting it started. And then, yeah, he built that reputation over years. And that's the thing to understand when you get into this female business. It is a reputation deal. One of the reasons I stay out of the bred heifer thing is, people read my article online and I'm kind of the most world-renowned cattle trader. Like, people that are buying bred females ain't gonna buy them from me, or at least not their heifers anyway. But understanding just some of those things. But talk to the sale barn and and because they hear all kinds of stuff. They get all kinds of feedback.
Okay. Well, as we kind of move towards the end of our conversation, I want to take a step back and look at things from the big picture. So, what's a hill you're willing to die on as it relates to cattle marketing?
Well, you only gave me one, huh? You said a hill.
I said one. Yep.
Yep. Maybe this is one of those paradigm things, but I've done sell by marketing now for 20 years, and when we talk about sell by marketing, we don't talk about break evens. It's like on the stocker cattle, it's ratio of dollars to pounds. On the female side, we're looking at how much value we're selling into the market versus how much we got paid for that value. I don't know how you could make a living in the cattle business and consistently be profitable unless you were doing sell by marketing and looking at those relationships. And I'll give you an example of this, Shay. A couple months ago, at one of the female specials here in Beatrice, they had a hard time getting $2,700 for bred heifers. One of the guys that, and I want to say he probably sold over 100 head on that sale. And, he's one of those guys that has that name, that sale barn reputation for being one of the best heifer development guys in our area. He just bought open heifers this week for $2,260 a head. So just a couple months ago, he couldn't give them away for 2,700. Now he's paying over 2,200 for replacements. I mean, come on, this relationship right here doesn't work. If you're going to sell something out of your inventory and buy back in, he's going backwards in a big way. So if you were going to calculate a break even on that scenario, he's hoping that he's going to sell the heifers that he bought this week. He's going to sell them next year for $800 to $1,000 more than what he couldn't give them away for this year, just to break even. That's a hell of a lot of optimism right there.
That's a lot of optimism.
You're looking at $3,500 bred heifers just to break even. Might happen. It's going to be interesting to see how that one works out. So, yep, I guess that's the hill I'm going to choose to die on, Shay.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back another time and you can share a different hill since you seem to have a few.
there's always something more passionate about, in other areas, but yeah.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, are there any resources or other information that you'd like to share for people who want to learn more about this topic or more about you?
Yeah, we do have a website, mrcattlemaster.com. And there's a little bit more about me on there, and there's a lot more information on the schools. And my wife just locked down some dates for schools coming up this year. So we're going to Idaho Falls, Idaho at the end of August. And then we're going to do 2 schools in Beatrice, Nebraska. One will be the first week of November, and the other one will be the first week of December. And then, of course, I've got the Doug's market intel that you can find on Farm Progress websites.
Alrighty. Well, Doug, thank you again for being on the show today and sharing your knowledge with all my listeners out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Shay. We'll see you.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. Thank you, Doug, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate it. Now, guys, if you are interested in learning more about podcasting itself, I do want to let you know that I do offer podcast coaching services, whether that is one-to-one work, a do-it-yourself workbook, or a one-time consulting fee if you just have a question and want to talk about it for an hour at a time. For information on that, head to the link in my show notes or the description, and everything's right there. With that, happy ranching, folks. Okay, folks, so you maybe thought that we were wrapped up there, but Doug and I continued to talk after we were recording, and we decided that maybe it was more information that she would want to hear. So here is a little bit of the bloopers, per se, of this conversation with Doug on Casual Cattle Conversations.
And we just did a marketing school last week. And I told that class, and my banker was sitting in there. He comes and sits in on some of them. And this time he brought two other people from the bank. And I'm like, yep, you're going to see it next week. Corn planting starts next week. And anything that ain't calved yet, she's coming to town. And nobody cares what they bring. I think this is probably the first time some of them corn farmers really weren't too disappointed with selling their coals being late, because there was a guy in there that he was going to 2250 was his stop sign. So I mean, you were guaranteed 2250 all day long. Didn't matter what color she was, what weight she was, what stage of pregnancy. You know,
Yeah,
I didn't think that was too bad of a deal. He kept the floor under the market, good flora.
yeah. Wow.
But I mean, that just shows the demand that we're seeing for these things right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, that's for sure. I know um my grandpa finally decided to have a dispersal at 80, what was he, 82 or 83, and this is over a year ago. So it was right when things were starting to pick up again, and we finally got everything sold, and he had had an accident, which kind of was part of the reason we were selling. And he got everything sold at the very beginning of February, and by the end of February of, that would have been end of February of 23, he looked at me and he goes, "We sold too early." And I was like, yeah, well, neither one of us were going to be, I was like, I would have had to have capped him out by myself for you, and that wasn't going to
You,
happen.
that's the thing though. You just don't know. I've had way more phone calls than I care to admit with some of these, guys that are probably in their 30s and 40s, and they're like, I can't go through another 2015 again. If this market crashes like it did then, I'm done. I'm out, and I'm never going to own cattle again. And well, I mean, we're seeing some pretty doggone high prices. It does get a little bit scary. Like if you think about a crash like that happening again, and you don't know what to do when that happens, But to your grandfather's point, I mean, he hit it. Yeah, you sold a year too early, but you're one BSE scare, you're one bird flu scare away from this whole thing just falling flat on its face. Having a 40-year-old brain now, Shay, I look at things a little different than I did when I was 20. But I remember I used to walk into these sale barns, and it was, every time I see a calf coming around, I thought, oh, this is going to be a great buy. This is going to be a bargain. It's a good place for me to start. It was always that crusty old bastard would run me up and not let me have a bargain. And I would get so mad at him. I'm like, you are physically incapable of taking care of these animals. Why do you have to step into something I'm trying to get started here? Now, this is where the 40-year-old brain kicks in. Um, he's traded his whole life to do this. You went to school in Nebraska, so you understand what I'm about to say. But years ago, Nebraska actually had a decent football team that won games and won championships. So when somebody gave you free Husker tickets, they really gave you something. So that guy passed on those free Husker tickets. He missed certain, family events, and, didn't take some of those vacations that, normal people take. He traded his life to do this job.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't just quit. And so that's kind of like your grandfather, kind of like, trying to pick his moment and make sure it went the right way. I mean, I kind of start to understand that a little bit on a different level now.